Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the most paranormal experience you have ever had? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that. But he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house, and as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him and turned around to see that the chair he had been sitting on moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he hadn't come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. It was like 2 a.m. I took my clothes off and went to sleep. A minute later, something hit me in the head. It was one of my socks. When I take them off, I throw them in a corner of my room, so someone throws them back at me. But there was no one in my room. I was alone 100%. It may not sound so scary, but it was for me. Not scary, just funny. My family still sails on the Great Lakes. A local author wrote 2 books called Haunted Lakes 1 and 2. The second book came out when I was 10 or 12. It detailed a spooky story of a cloudy day where a local guide was leading one visitor through an island lighthouse. It was a cloudy, crappy day. The visitor stopped and asked the guide whether he has kids with him on the island. The guide says no, and as far as he knows, there's no kid on the island. The visitor is puzzled since he can hear distant cries of "mother, mother," and kids playing. The author of the book assumes it is haunted because many of the old keepers were from Germany. But I've always had a strong suspicion that two just heard my brother and me, probably about 4 and 6 at the time. My family tended to go out to islands on our sailboat, even when the weather wasn't great, and we would play outside as long as it wasn't pouring rain or storming. We also grew up speaking German, since my mom taught German at a school, and we were quite loud. Finally, we had a small craft and knew all the anchorages. If we had been on an island, no one might have seen us. So I think I got written into a book as a ghost. TLDR, an author of Hauntings on the Great Lakes, wrote about a haunted lighthouse, but I'm pretty sure the kids playing noises that he assumed were from old German lightkeepers were my German-speaking brother and me. This one isn't necessarily scary, but it definitely is paranormal. I was 14 and sitting by myself in my living room playing some Halo when I noticed that the room around me seemed oddly quiet. I paused the game and tried to listen for the difference. It was strange. My house is over 100 years old, and usually there's an odd creak audible from somewhere nearby. Not now, though. It was dead quiet. I felt strange, but not threatened. There was nothing sinister about the silence. I sat for a few more minutes just listening. It almost felt peaceful, actually. Then suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder very lightly and briefly, but even today I still remember the distinct feeling of a hand on my shoulder. It didn't scare me, nor did I jump up in surprise. I actually felt a familiar presence like family. I mentioned the experience to my mom, and she told me she experienced the same thing, only one room over. She says she felt her father's presence with his hand. Pretty cool. Around 9 years ago, a woman 37 years old with blonde long hair died due to a car accident at night where she crashed into our zinc staircase and doing so crashed our house as well. A few months later, coming home in the dark from training, I saw her standing in that corner of our house. I looked away and then back again. She was still there, one step further in my direction. I could see her clearly because of the light from the motion sensor. I've got 2 stories. First, I was in bed, and just that part in between being fully awake and asleep, and felt a hand on my hip. Then my husband, I assumed, began to kiss me. I was all, come on, you shouldn't have started this earlier. Really? I opened my eyes and saw that he had his back to me. I could still feel that hand on my hip. Second, I was a nurse working nights. Around 2 a.m., I was walking up the hall and noticed the TV was on in an unoccupied room. I stepped 1 foot into the dark room to turn the TV off and heard from the TV, "Good morning, Alice." My first name is Alice. I switched to days not too long after that. In the late 90s, my mom had been suffering from rheumatoid arthritis and finally cancer. She had a little rack of air with a long hose that stretched through the house. When she walked from room to room, she pulled the hose across the linoleum and carpeting. The sound was very distinct. At the time, I had a girlfriend, and we were in an overly dramatic relationship that we should probably not have been in. My mother didn't approve of my girlfriend, but she left me my space and was only occasionally vocal about it. Sometimes after my mother passed, my girlfriend and I were home alone, doing what teenagers do when alone, when I heard the air hose being pulled roughly down the hallway and across the linoleum. I froze, and a cold, sinking sensation settled in my guts. Within a couple of months, I reevaluated the relationship and we broke up. To this day, I wonder if it was my mother or my subconscious. Not my own story, but that of my great aunt's. After her mother died, my great aunt placed one of her mother's dolls on her fireplace. Over the next year or so, anytime my aunt and uncle argued, weird marks would appear on the doll's face that looked exactly like tear marks. The eyes would also shift to follow my uncle, and it scared the crap out of him. It was eventually so creepy that my aunt went to her mother's grave and said that she was okay and didn't need to be looked after so closely and to please stop. And the doll never had tear tracks or shifted its eyes again. Yeah, creepy dolls are never cool, so yeah, that's pretty wild. But like I said, creepy dolls, that's a no-go. I was a cleaner in a senior dementia living facility, and there was a woman who had lots of crosses and Bibles. She didn't say much, but she liked me and would smile and want to interact, wanting to push my cleaning cart and garbage and laundry carts with me, and often she would say, "Boo." She died after I was there for a couple of years, and a new woman moved into her room. She was a nice lady, very old and friendly, and when I clean people's rooms, sometimes they want to chat and talk a little bit. Anyway, so I knock and come in, and I'm cleaning, and she's talking to me about how I'm like a wizard, and I clean the room so well and fast, and I'm telling her I've been doing it for a few years now, and she starts talking about the book she's reading, and we just are having a nice conversation. As this happens, a picture falls off the wall and smashes the glass. It's kind of weird, but it happens, so I clean it up and leave the room. Right after this, it was time to take the garbage to the basement, so I loaded up the garbage bin and started collecting from the next unit. It's after lunch now, so most people are in bed, and the workers are having their meeting, so there is no one around. And in my life, I swear I heard "boo." I looked around and still no one around, and I thought that it sounded like the lady who had the room before me. But it was this realization that I just couldn't believe. It was like she was jealous of the other woman and ended our conversation by knocking the thing off the wall and then following me with the garbage bin like she did before. It seemed strange. When I was 17, I went to my friend's house for some beers for his birthday. I probably only had about 5 drinks. In the early hours of the morning, probably around 2 or 3 a.m., I head out to the kitchen for a drink. I pour a drink of water and turn around to take a sip, and as I'm swallowing, I swear I hear footsteps. The footsteps, the ground in the entire room is all made up of tiles, so I hold my drink down and listen for a few seconds. Next thing I know, I hear fast footsteps in front of me, running towards me. and suddenly a huge cold breeze blew right through me. At that point, I just freaked out and ran back for the bedroom. I ended up walking and waking up my friend and telling him what happened, and we listened and could hear odd bangs and bumps from out there, but nothing out of the ordinary. After that event happened, I'll still always consider it and remember it though. It gives me goosebumps to write about this. My childhood home was haunted. Countless people have seen and heard things. The craziest thing that happened to me, though, was when I was 14 or 15. I was an avid gamer, Xbox 360 days. So what started to happen was that my Xbox would turn off randomly while I played. It was a newer Xbox 360, so it would make a beep noise when the power button on the system itself was touched. It also messed with my disc tray button. Well, one day after school, I was playing some games, etc., and of course my Xbox turned off. Frustrated, I said out loud, "Okay, you've turned my Xbox off and messed with my disc tray, now turn it on." I shit you not, my Xbox turned itself on not even a second after finishing my sentence. It only time it ever turned on by itself, and it never happened again. In 2003, I was on a road trip with two friends. My friend who owned the car was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. We never wore seatbelts because we were teenagers and, well, stupid. We stopped at a rest stop in Ohio to get drinks, and something in my head told me to put the seatbelt on, after not wearing it for the previous 3 hours, so I did. We got into a car accident 10 minutes later. I was drinking my soda when the airbag went off, and it broke my nose and knocked out 3 teeth. It would have been much worse without the seatbelt. I lived with a roommate in an old house that was on the Underground Railroad. One night I fell asleep on my back with the lights on. I woke up suddenly to a voice coming over what sounded like a megaphone. I can't recall what it was shouting, but it was as if it was giving commands. As it was prone to night terrors, I was paralyzed. This eventually passed, and I fell back to sleep. Waking in the morning, I walked past the bathroom, and my roommate was shaving at the sink. He looked terrified. I asked what happened, and he said he was woken up by the smoke detector. He said that as he approached, it accelerated in beeping, and as he returned down the hall to hit the light switch, it slowed down, only to accurate as he walked back toward it. He pulled the battery and laid awake in bed until the sun came up. He was terrified. We literally had to talk to the house and assure whatever was there that we meant no harm. No incidents followed. I was about 25 or 26. I was asleep in my room. My mom and sister were asleep in their rooms. It was probably between 2 and 3 a.m. I woke up because of really loud, forceful steps in the outside hallway. I lay there for a few minutes because it was late. I'd been asleep and I was disoriented. The hallway in my mom's house has a lot of creaky parts and unmistakable parts where you know someone is stepping. I was trying to wake up and get my bearings as this was happening. It sounded like an extremely heavy man was stomping up and down the hallway. Then I heard the door to my dad's old office open. The door is kind of swollen, so it makes a distinctive sound, and you really have to exert some pressure on it to open it as it is pulled closed. Once I got an idea of what was happening, I got up and opened my door. About the time my sister opened hers, because the disturbance woke her up too. There was a printer in his office still hooked up to a computer. The printer started randomly printing pages of script. I think it was called wingding. It was such a little symbol and pictures. It was just page after page, randomly, in the middle of the night after all the commotion and phantom stomps in the hall. It was the most singular, weird experience of my life. My dad had died about 10 years before, and I've often wondered if he was trying to communicate with us. But it happened. Super effing weird. The house I grew up in had someone die on the property. We used to have a crystal ashtray on the fireplace mantel my father received as a gift from the White House when he did some work there. My friend was in the living room when the ashtray started sliding across the mantel by itself about 6 inches, then stopped. My father said to ignore it because that's just the lady who died in the house trying to get your attention. He would always call her by her name and say, Okay, that's enough. We know you're here. Don't scare the guests. It wasn't scary for me per se, but my friends got freaked out by it when it did happen. The next town over, we had a famous exorcism occur in the 1940s that became a movie based on the event, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Over 10 years ago, I moved into this old house on the outskirts of a small town. It was a 3-story house split into 2 apartments. The main floor and the basement were mine and my boyfriend's at the time, and the top and top floor were rented by twin brothers. There was a landing inside that was communal and led to both our front doors. 3 different incidents happened. First, my boyfriend had a few friends come over after work to hang out. We were all in the living room, directly in front of our door, leading to the landing. We wanted to smoke some weed, and it was still illegal back then. I got up and made sure the door was fully shut and locked. The second I sat back down, and the door slammed open so hard that it hit the wall. My boyfriend was up in an instant, but nobody was out in the landing. He went and knocked on the twins' door, but they were both gone at work still. The friends left soon after, LOL. Second, I was home alone. It was like 10 a.m., and my boyfriend and twins were all gone to work. I had our stereo on while listening to the radio. I shut it off to go take a shower. Halfway through my shower, the stereo flipped onto the highest volume it could go, and it was flipping to CD mode, playing like track 5 or something. I've never gotten out of a shower so fast in my life. In my Latin and last incident, I was home alone again, getting super and supper ready for when my boyfriend got home. I was flipping between watching a movie in the living room and stirring the spaghetti, noodles, and sauce in the kitchen. After about 3 back and forths on the last trip to the kitchen, I found a little red plastic toy car sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor. I never did find out where it came from.